So, guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. Ich bin Candice Gordon, Leiterin der Kulturabteilung der irischen Botschaft in Deutschland. Und ich freue mich sehr, euch zu begrüßen zu unserer Online-Präsentation Neue irische Literatur, die bis jetzt noch nicht auf Deutsch erschienen ist. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Candice Gordon, Head of Cultural Affairs at the Embassy of Ireland in Germany, and I'm very happy that you're joining us this evening to celebrate St. Brigid's Day. Tonight's event, Brigidsfest, hot off the press, is our online showcase of new Irish literature that has yet to be published in German. We have an incredible lineup tonight with 7 brilliant writers. We'll have a Q&A, a short interview with each one, followed by readings in English and German. Each author's segment should last approximately 15 minutes and will be conducted in alphabetical order. So we hope that there will be enough time at the end for 1 or 2 questions to the authors. So if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box throughout the event. Während der Veranstaltung können Sie Ihre Fragen in den Chatbox eingeben. You can also raise your virtual hand, and if time you're called upon to ask your question directly. You will then be asked to unmute yourself by the technical host, and otherwise we ask you all to please keep yourselves muted throughout the event. Bitte halten Sie Ihre Mikrofon während der gesamten Veranstaltung stumm. Außer Sie werden während der Fragerunde aufgefordert, Ihr Mikrofon auszuschalten. Now, before we begin, I would like to hand over to Ireland's ambassador to Germany, Dr. Nicholas O'Brien.
Thanks very much indeed, Candice, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren, und herzlich willkommen zu unserer besonderen literarischen Veranstaltung anlässlich des St. Brigid's Day. Sorry, I almost said St. Patrick's Day. It's a great pleasure to welcome you again for another St. Brigid's Day with you here in Germany. We would really love to have been back in the embassy this year, but unfortunately that's not possible. So we're thrilled to be able to reach out across Germany with this very special event featuring 7 absolutely brilliant Irish writers. Now, St. Brigid's Day goes back, in fact, to pre-Christian times in Ireland and was seen as marking the first day of spring. Brigid also symbolizes healing. And I think that having come through another pandemic winter, it's opportune to celebrate the bright rays of spring and the promise which the future holds. Now, here at the embassy, we have a tradition of celebrating female creativity at this time of the year. Since 2019, we've invited Irish writers to participate in Brigid Meets Berlin. Usually, as I said, an in-person event at the embassy. But this year we have renamed the event Brigidsfest, as we, along with our Consulate General in Frankfurt and mine, invite audiences from across Germany to hear from 7 writers presenting their new books. This year, we are also taking a new angle of presenting books that have not yet been published into German, but of course, we hope they will be in the near future. We've commissioned translations by Anna-Nina Kroll, Hans Christian Oeser, and Werner Löcher-Lawrence of the opening segments of 6 of the books. And we've specially invited publishers from all over Germany to join us in this showcase of Irish talent. Just to mention, Louise Nealon's Snowflake has already been translated by Anna-Nina Kroll for Mare Verlag and will be released in Germany this summer. Now, as Candice mentioned, we started off a little bit late because our moderator tonight was due to be journalist Jennifer Collins, but a sizable area of Berlin lost internet connectivity this evening, and Jennifer, unfortunately, is part of that. So Candice, our head of culture, has kindly agreed to step in at the last minute, and she will engage with writers Audrey Mcgee, Elaine Feeney, Hilary Fannin, Louise Nealon, Olivia Fitzsimons, Roisin Kiberd, and Wendy Erskine. We will also hear readings in English from the authors and in German from Kate Ferguson and actress Iris Boss. And I had the pleasure of presenting an Irish Night In just 2 weeks ago with Kate. We also want to thank Literature Ireland, whose Chief Executive Sinead Magee joins us here this evening for their intense cooperation, not only tonight, but on an ongoing basis. Es ist mir eine große Freude, Sie alle heute Abend hierher einzuladen, 7 spannende Autoren zu hören, die ihre neuen Bücher sowie Auszüge aus den deutschen Unterstützungen, die wir in Auftrag gegeben haben, vorstellen. Ich wünsche Ihnen einen angenehmen Abend. Vielen Dank, and I wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, as the ambassador said, unfortunately, Jennifer Collins, who was due to moderate this evening, can't make it, which is a real shame because she is a professional journalist. She would have done a really, really good job. I'm going to step in and do my best to ask good questions. And yeah, we'll keep the show on the road. Also, just to mention, yeah, Jennifer, she is a journalist with Deutsche Welle and also has a really great feminist podcast called Flawed. So it would have been a really, really good event this evening to have her host, but it will still be a great event. And as I said, I'll do my best. So without further ado, we will head over to the first writer of this evening. I'm very, very happy to introduce Audrey Mcgee. Are you there, Audrey?
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Hi. Great.
Guten Abend.
Guten Abend.
Ja, es freut mich hier zu sein. Also vielen Dank.
So Audrey, your book, The Colony, which will be out in February the 3rd, tomorrow, is it?
Thursday.
Thursday. Oh, okay, great. So could you just start off by telling us a little bit about the book?
So The Colony, it's my second novel, and it tells the story of an English artist who travels out to an Irish-speaking Ireland in the summer of 1979. And he goes there to paint and to remove himself from London, but he's shortly followed by a French linguist. And the French linguist has been studying the Irish language over the previous years, and he's doing a kind of a study. He's doing a study, his thesis, on the demise of the Irish language and the arrival of English onto the island. And the novel uses these two characters on the island to explore language, to explore art, to explore colonization, and to explore what it is to be colonized and what it is to be the colonizer. Yeah, and it's obviously their interactions with the islanders and the islanders who are using the language, and really just, you know, how they interact and the consequences of those interactions.
Okay, thank you. Could you tell us a little bit about why you chose the topic of colonization and also a bit about the use of the Irish language?
Yeah, so I've kind of, for a long time, I've been fascinated by colonization, but not in an Irish context, very much in a global context. I lived in Australia for quite some time, and I spent a huge amount of my life reading not only German and French literature, which was my undergrad in UCD, but also Indian and African literature, and constantly drawn to this colonial, post-colonial literature, because discovering that actually, you know, we share so many things, but we don't see ourselves as colonized in Ireland. It's a really funny kind of disconnect, in a way, that at least I see it as a disconnect, that when you read African literature, when you read Indian literature, they very much kind of analyze their relationships with the colonizer, and we kind of don't do that. And it's always fascinating. It is kind of, and finding myself drawn to this kind of concept of why don't we do this? And you know, you find that why you don't do it is because so many of your relationships have these kind of very latent and deep interactions that we don't even understand. And the novel tries to get underneath those latencies of, you know, power and control and gestures and movements and phrases and words that we use and have been using to either exert power or to kind of actually to respond to the person who has the power. So the novel looks at power as a controlling force, and then how people respond to that power and try and generate their own power. So there's it's a tiny island, it's only 92 people on the island, but there's an incredible power struggle going on, because you're trying to form those who have been colonized are always trying to kind of get out and create their own identities and have formed their own identities. But that's very difficult, even kind of 100 years on, because so much of it, so many responses have been learnt and passed on from one generation to the next. So I try to look at those and unpick those, and look at what it means to be Irish and to have emerged from being a colonized country 100 years on.
And so the use of the Irish language.
So in relation to Irish, so then, you know, one of the tools of colonization is a battle over language and what language is used. So if you look at Ireland as a template of colonization, as it arrived through Henry VIII and then further implemented by Elizabeth I, his daughter, and all the way through, one of the devices used is to divide people along religious lines. In our case, Catholic and Protestant. If you look at somewhere in Rwanda, they were divided along Hutu, Tutsis. You know, so different countries will have different systems. But one of the things that's common is the use of language as a tool of control. So in Ireland, obviously English came in and it became the dominant language of power, in terms of, you know, if you wanted to buy a house, if you want enough people buying houses, but if you wanted to, you know, have an education, it was through English. Irish became a very diminished language, and this is what Mohammed Ben Rahab calls, you know, language as a proxy for conflict. So I look really at how Irish became a battlefront, and remains a battlefront, as we see in Northern Ireland with the Irish Language Act. So, you know, how do you respond to that when your language is weaponized? So yeah, so it kind of looks at Irish as a character, if you like, within it all, and how then as an Irish speaker you deal with that, where your language becomes a tool of control or loss of control.
Okay, thank you, Audrey. And on that note, we'll have the first reading of this evening in German with Kate Ferguson. Hi, Kate.
Hi there.
Thanks for joining us tonight. So Kate will be reading the translation of the first excerpt by Werner Löcher-Lawrence, the first excerpt of The Colony.
Er gab dem Schiffer die Staffelei, beugte sich tief über die Kaimauer zum Wasser hinunter. Haben Sie sie? Hab sie, Mr. Lloyd. Seine Pinsel und Farben waren in eine Mahogany-Kiste, die er in dickes, weißes Plastik gepackt hatte. Er trug sie an den Rand der Kaimauer. Die ist schwer, sagte er. Ist schon okay, Mr. Lloyd. Geben Sie. Er kniete sich auf den Beton und ließ die Kiste an der Mauer hinunter. Das weiße Plastik rutschte ihm unter den Händen weg. Ich kann sie nicht halten, sagte er. Lassen Sie los, Mr. Lloyd. Er saß auf den Fersen und sah zu, wie der Schiffer die Kiste und die Staffelei unter die Sitzbank im Bug schob und beides mit einer grellblauen Leine zusammenband. Ist das so sicher? Das ist okay, Mr. Lloyd. Ich hoffe, das ist so sicher. Wie gesagt, das ist okay. Er stand auf und schlug sich Staub und Schmutz von der Hose. Der Schiffer hob den Arm und bot ihm seine Hand an. Jetzt nur noch Sie, Mr. Lloyd. Sir. Lloyd nickte. Er gab dem Schiffer seinen Leinenrucksack und trat vorsichtig auf die in die bröckelnde Kaimauer eingelassene Leiter. Andersrum, Mr. Lloyd, mit dem Rücken zu mir. Er sah nach unten zu dem kleinen Boot, dem Meer. Er zögerte, steckte fest. Das geht schon, Mr. Lloyd. Er drehte sich, schob den rechten Fuß nach unten und suchte nach der ersten Sprosse unter sich, hielt sich am rostigen Eisen fest, ein Bein in der Luft, die Augen fest geschlossen gegen die Möglichkeit, sich die Haut aufzuschürfen, die Finger aufzureißen, die Hände zu verunstalten, auszurutschen, auf den Sprossen, voller Tang und Schleim zu fallen, ins Meer zu fallen. Die Sprosse ist direkt unter Ihnen, Mr. Lloyd. Ich kann sie nicht finden. Strecken Sie das Knie, Mr. Lloyd, weiter runter. Ich kann nicht. Es geht schon. Er streckte das Knie und fand die Sprosse, hielt inne, die Leiter festgepackt. Nur noch 2 Sprossen, Mr. Lloyd. Er bewegte die Hände die Leiter hinunter, dann die Füße, verharrte auf der 3. Sprosse. Er sah unten auf die Lücke zwischen seinen Füßen und dem tief im Wasser liegenden Boot. Das ist zu weit. Strecken Sie einfach ein Bein aus, Mr. Lloyd. Lloyd schüttelte den Kopf, den Körper, sah wieder nach unten zu seinem Rucksack, der Kiste mit den Farben, alles bereit für die Fahrt mit einem handgefertigten Boot über das Meer. Fuhr mit dem rechten Bein hinab, dann mit dem linken, klammerte sich aber immer noch an die Leiter. Selbstporträt 1. Fallen. Selbstporträt 2. Ertrinken. Selbstporträt 3. Verschwinden. Selbstporträt 4. Unter Wasser. Selbstporträt 5. Der Verschwundene. Lassen Sie los, Mr. Lloyd. Ich kann nicht. Ist schon okay. Er krachte ins Boot. Es kippte zur Seite, seine Hose nass, Stiefel und Strümpfe. Das Wasser sickerte ihm zwischen die Zehen, während der Schiffer mit dem rechten Bein gegen die hereinschwappende See anpumpte, hitzig, bis das kleine Curragh seine Balance wiedergefunden hatte. Er keuchte. Meine Füße sind nass. Sie haben Glück, dass es nur Ihre Füße sind, Mr. Lloyd. Der Schiffer deutete aufs Heck. Gehen Sie und setzen Sie sich, Mr. Lloyd. Aber meine Füße sind nass. Der Schiffer atmete einmal ruhig durch. So ist es nun mal, Mr. Lloyd. Lloyd schob sich nach hinten und hielt sich an den schwieligen Händen des Schiffers fest, drehte sich und setzte sich auf das schmale, splittrige Brett. Ich habe nasse Füße, sagte er. Er streckte dem Schiffer die Hände entgegen. Ich nehme jetzt meinen Rucksack. Danke. Der Schiffer gab ihm ihn und Lloyd stellte ihn sich auf die Knie, weg vom Wasser, das im Kiel schwappte. Es ist okay, wenn Sie sich es anders überlegen, Mr. Lloyd. Sie müssen nichts zahlen. Wenigstens nicht alles. Ich mache weiter wie geplant. Danke. Ist nicht mehr üblich, so rüberzufahren? Das ist mir bewusst. Es kann eine schwere Überfahrt werden. Das habe ich gelesen. Schwerer als sonst wo. Danke. Ich schaffe das schon. Er knöpfte seine gewachste Jacke zu und setzte seine neue Tweedmütze auf. Das Grau und Braun passte zum Rest seiner Kleidung. Selbstporträt. Vorbereitung auf die Überfahrt. Er fuhr sich mit der Hand die Beine hinunter und schlug sich die Wassertropfen von der Hose, den Strümpfen, den Schnürbändern seine Stiefel. Bleiben Sie lange, Mr. Lloyd? Den Sommer über. Das sollte reichen. Lloyd setzte sich aufrecht, den Rucksack auf den Schoß. Ich bin soweit, sagte er. Okay. Sollten wir nicht losfahren? Nur die Ruhe. Wann? Nicht mehr lange. Aber wir verpassen das Tageslicht. Der Schiffer lachte. Wir haben Juni, Mr. Lloyd. Und? Da ist noch lange Licht. Wie ist die Vorhersage? Der Schiffer sah zum Himmel hinauf. Ein ruhiger Tag, Gott sei Dank. Aber das könnte sich ändern. Das könnte es, Mr. Lloyd. Wird es? Oh, sicher, Mr. Lloyd. Dann sollten wir jetzt losfahren, bevor es sich ändert. Noch nicht, Mr. Lloyd. Lloyd seufzte. Er schloss die Augen und wandte sein Gesicht der Sonne zu, überrascht von der Wärme, wo er doch nur nördliche Kälte und nördlichen Regen erwartet hatte. Er genoss sie ein paar Minuten und öffnete die Augen dann wieder. Der Schiffer stand noch da, wo er gestanden hatte, und sah an Land. Sein Körper bewegte sich im Rhythmus des Wassers, das sanft gegen die Kaimauer schlug. Lloyd seufzte wieder. Ich denke wirklich, wir sollten jetzt los, sagte er. Noch nicht, Mr. Lloyd. Dankeschön. Und jetzt hören wir eine englische Lesung von Audrey Mcgee. Over to you, Audrey.
Vielen Dank, Kate. Das war eine schöne Lesung. Danke. He retrieved his coat, his hat, his sketch pad, his pencil, and climbed the hill through the village, past the old men leaning against a low wall, cigarettes in hands and mouths, dogs at their feet. They waved at him, smiled at him, and watched as he negotiated the path, uncertain of his route, knowing only that he should leave, get away from the eyes staring at him, the mouths talking of him, his breath and step faster than was comfortable, slowing only when he was away from the village, walking past piles of turf covered in blue, orange, and white plastic, tied down with rope but flapping nonetheless in the evening wind. He walked by the vegetable patch, alongside rows of potatoes, cabbages, and onions coated in layers of rotting seaweed, hens pecking at the soil beneath. He passed 3 cows, 2 pigs, several more stray hens, 4 donkeys, and a flock of sheep grazing freely on grass that grew more thickly across his path. A path that became a trail as he travelled further from the village into the open wilderness of the island, the earth moist underfoot, but the grass yellowed and dried, stripped and burnt by the wind. He spotted rabbits hopping, bouncing, and birds rising from the grass, calling as they flew upwards into the evening sun. He whistled then and walked on, pausing when the trail faded, disappeared into the grass. He looked around for a route, but failed to find one and headed instead across untrodden grass towards the steepest part of the island, halting to sketch a tree beaten by wind into a tight ball of twisted branch and trunk, and again to draw a small lake, the sun sparkling on the water. He hummed, climbing the hill in search of the cliffs he had come to paint, noticing that the ground sloped more steeply, that it pressed into the backs of his legs as he headed to the western edge of the island, towards the evening sun still high in the sky, higher than he was used to. His stomach fluttered. Anticipation, excitement, self-portrait, blind date. He walked across the edge of the cliff, pitched his body forward and closed his eyes. Book truth, walking boat. Book untruth, singing boatmen. Untruth, truth, one all. Cliff as decider. He opened his eyes and looked down on the cliffs. He kicked at the wind-burnt grass. Pastels, blue, green, tinges of pink, Sunday painters and park railings, unworthy of oils, of mildew, rain and cold, of cabbage, potato and fish that's fried. He slumped onto the grass and buried his head into his arms. Self-portrait, blind date, the aftermath. He calculated his losses, the money spent on boats, trains and buses, the deposit on the house and the fresh expense of travelling south, to sunflowers, red roofs, parched earth, glistening sea, to painting already done. He stood up and looked again at the cliffs, hoping to see them differently as they were in the book. He shook his head and turned back towards the village, walking along the edge of the island, pushing against a strengthening wind. He tucked his hat into his pocket, disgruntled by the ferocity as he climbed upwards in search of a path, scanning for a route back to his cottage to pack his bags and leave with the boatmen, to return, back again to the sated, the smug, the dealers, their darlings, Auerbach, Bacon and Freud, the dealers' darlings, the darling dealer. The wind became too strong and he dropped to his knees, uncertain of the way back. He climbed to the top of a slope, to the edge of the island in the hope of seeing lights from the village. He looked down. On cliffs, as they were in the book, raw, rugged, violent beauty, the ocean thunderous as it crashed into the rock 200 feet beneath his knees and hands. He flopped onto his stomach and reached further over the edge, the force of the ocean against the rock reverberating through his flesh into his bones. Beauty, unearthed, unseen, unpainted, worthy of oils. He laughed. of mildew, rain and cold, of cabbage, potato and fish that's fried.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And thank you, Kate, as well, for a wonderful reading, and Werner for a wonderful translation. So we're going to head over to Elaine. Elaine Feeney, are you there?
I'm here. Hello.
Hi, Elaine. Elaine, you're joining us from Athenry?
Correct. I am on the West Coast. How are you, Candice?
I'm grand, thanks. Yeah, and just to mention to everyone, we had the pleasure of Elaine's company for our Irish night in a couple of weeks ago, around 10 days ago, and yeah, brilliant with Lisa McInerney as well and Martin Ward, and yeah, it was such a pleasure. But without further ado, Elaine, could you please describe your novel As You Were a little bit? Why did you choose to set the novel almost entirely in a hospital ward?
Yeah, so this is my novel As You Were, and it centers around the main protagonist, a woman called Sinead Hines, and she's a woman in her late 30s, a property developer. And it's not given anything away to say in the very early pages of the novel, she gets a devastating diagnosis in hospital of a terminal illness. And in those moments, she's very frantic and she drives home and she conceals her diagnosis from her husband and her sons. She's 3 teenage sons. And eventually we end up on a hospital ward and Sinead is surrounded by a motley crew of strangers on the ward, and 2 women in particular really, I suppose, help her. It's a great question. Why? Maybe because it was my first novel and I thought a hospital ward would be a great setting because you can't really go anywhere except to the toilet. But actually that ended up being quite constrained. There was a lot of constraints with that. But I wrote the novel between marriage equality, the referendum, and repealing the 8th after being in hospital myself for some time. And it was just that frenetic, frantic energy of Ireland that I wanted to sort of maybe capture at that time.
And so could you just elaborate a little bit more on that? I mean, what's the energy, what's the frantic sort of nature that I mean, we like a lot of people here will know that Ireland went through some massive changes in the past sort of 5 or so years. But maybe you can just describe that a bit more.
Yeah, to me, it just felt like Ireland was changing so quickly, and on the airwaves and, you know, in national discourse, we were having a lot of outpourings around, you know, somatic pain and institutional trauma and institutional abuse. I've taught in Tuam, where the mother and baby home is and was, and I suppose is still there in some aspects, very tragically. I taught there for 20 years, and I think we were only beginning to grapple with the stories coming out in those years. And it just felt like it was an onslaught on the airwaves, and people were sharing really personal, deeply personal trauma and pain, particularly around women's health and women and children and reproductive issues. And I wanted the energy of the novel in some ways to mirror this. And for me as well, a hospital ward is a place where you're sort of stripped of yourself in some ways, and, you know, gender and class and so on. And I was on a mixed gender ward in hospital, which people find really strange in the novel, that this novel is set on a mixed gender ward. But I found that, you know, you really hear stories and you meet people that you ordinarily don't meet often in your day-to-day life. And they share, and the most intimate details of their life are shared on the ward, whether they want them to be or not, you know. And I was interested in the moral question as well of who should know your story and who should you tell your story to, and had Sinead the right to conceal her illness for a very great part of the novel.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. So we're going to go back to Kate Ferguson for
I didn't catch that. Sorry. Could you try again?
So Kate, would you mind giving the reading another translation from Werner Löcher-Lawrence? It's the introduction sort of first excerpt from As You Were.
Sure. wie du warst von Elaine Feeney, übersetzt von Werner Löcher-Lawrence. Pischrogues. Ich habe keiner Menschenseele erzählt, dass ich krank war. Okay, einer fetten Elster. Sie war das erste schlagende Herz, das ich nach dem Verlassen der Onkologie sah. Funkelnd und ernst saß sie auf der Haube des Volvos. One for sorrow. Und ich grüßte sie so, wie du es tust, wenn du mit einer Elster allein bist, voller Unbehagen. Und sie flog davon und stach ihren schwarzen Bogen ins Blau des Himmels. Ein Pfeil zeigt auf, sie befinden sich hier. Das ist okay. Atme. Du bist nur ein Punkt. Verwirbelte Raum. Atme. Niemand wird dich je finden. Gut. Das ist eine gute Sache. Rums. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Rums. Nachdem ich die Elster gegrüßt hatte, raste ich mit 130 Stundenkilometern über die M6. Steinerne Mauern stürzten vorbei und die letzten Augusttage verschworen sich mit der Nacht und senkten eine kalte Dämmerung herab. 39 passt. Auf der Windschutzscheibe kroch Nebel um die Initialen meines ältesten Sohnes, eingeschrieben in ein dickes Herz. Aber mir ging es gut. Vater sagte stets, dass es mir gut ging, und so trate ich den Überbringen schlechter Nachrichten mit den Jahren immer weniger. Miss Sinead Hines ging es gut. Vater sagte es ging mir gut, es geht mir gut, es wird mir gut gehen. Aber Himmel, wenn ich sie zu fassen kriege, bringe ich sie verdammt nochmal um. Ich erwürge sie, die kleine Schlampe. Es geht ihr gut und sie tut so, als wäre sie krank. In Wahrheit ist alles völlig in Ordnung mit ihr. Aber ich sag dir was, mit dem alten Schaf, mit dem stimmt einiges nicht. Die ganze Nacht kommt es nicht hoch. Und sie hat sich nicht mal die Mühe gemacht, nach ihm zu sehen. Kein einziges Mal, hat nicht mal einen schnellen Blick darauf geworfen. Die würde auf keine Porzellantasse aufpassen. Wo ist sie? Hier? Drunter? Hier im Schrank? Der Trockenkammer? Komm raus, wo immer du bist. Fee, fi, fo, fum. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Wo in Gottes Namen ist sie? Lässt das alte Schaf die ganze Nacht auf dem Rücken liegen, liest irgendwo ein Buch und sie ist nicht krank, es geht ihr gut. Mit ihr ist alles in Ordnung, gut geht's ihr. Sie versteckt sich nur, scheut die Arbeit, das Luder nun, das kann sie dem toten Tier erzählen. Das kann sie mit ihren Büchern. Ich gebe ihr Bücher, wenn ich sie zu fassen kriege. Meine Mutter meinte, ich solle ein heißes Bad nehmen oder einen hübschen Hut aufsetzen, wenn ich einen schlechten Tag hätte. Ging ich aus dem Haus, stand sie an der Tür und massierte mir die Stelle zwischen den Schulternblättern mit den Fingerknöcheln, während ich an ihr vorbeischlüpfte. Die Spitze ihres Zeigefingers tauchte sie in die kleine Höhlung zu Jesus' Füßen und schnipste ein paar Tröpfchen hinter mir her. Er hing an einem losen Nagel neben der Tür, teigig und dürr, mit roten Spritzern auf Händen und Füßen, einem Lendenschurz und unwiderstehlichen blauen Augen. Im Namen des Vaters, des Sohnes und des Heiligen Geistes. Amen. Ich wuchs auf einer Farm auf und behielt alle schlechten Nachrichten für mich. Glück und Unglück auszuplaudern erzeugt Aufruhr. Lieber versteckte ich mich unter meinem Bett und rollte mich fest in meinem Federbett ein. Vater brüllte nach den Dingen, die er dringend brauchte. Dem Hammer, der Leiter, einer Tasse Tee, einem Pflaster, den Überbrückungskabel, helfenden Händen, Mutter, dem Telefon, dem Tierarzt. Das Telefon für den Tierarzt wurde hastig und aus der Küche geholt. Mutter legte den cremefarbenen Hörer in seine große Hand und wählte für ihn. Eine Hand lag auf seiner Stirn. In Panik, immer in Panik. Ich liebte es, draußen bei den Tieren zu sein, besonders wenn sie gerade Nachwuchs bekommen hatten. Fohlen sind absolut unglaublich, wie schnell sie stehen und mit ihrer Mutter loslaufen. Am meisten mochte ich es jedoch, völlig allein und unbeaufsichtigt zu sein. Vielen Dank. Und jetzt hören wir wieder von Elaine Feeney auf Englisch.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. So Sinead grew up on a farm. So when she comes to terms with her own dying and mortality, she takes herself back and remembers this old sheep that they had grown up, that she remembers taking the wool off. So I'm just going to read a section where she shears this sheep, and it's a metaphor for her own state. I was shearing a sheep and she was wrathful, for she was an old sheep, the oldest ewe we had. And we had kept her from when she was a pet lamb, fed her by the bottle. For her mother died moments after birthing her and left her a white mound heaped out on our scraggy hill, just down from the yard, where she lay among the yellow ferns and tall thistles. So when she was a young lamb, all her memory came from our touch, the bottle to her mouth, her wool hard and coarse. And as she grew, her sensory memory was alive. And now she'd had enough of her wool being taken, stripped off her. She was hopping and leaping at the back of the holding pen, late May, flocked with all the other sheep. She darted this way and that, head down. She was too old now to be meat as she scrambled back into the corner, her feet skidding out from under her, desperate to stay heavy with her own coat. For maybe her memory knew that November was cruel, but nothing to the March winds that would come again with hail and wicked frosts. And that utter cruelty of April, trying to kill off what it has spawned, spiting itself, when the early growth would flourish in earnest. And she had birthed lamb after lamb, clean and fast every spring, one of the first, offering us Easter meat. And every summer we grabbed her by the neck, straddled her between our thighs, my younger brother holding down her body, and I'd knock her sideways gently, and he'd kneel upon her warm, coarse wool to pin her as I snipped with an old blade shears. And her coat flocked back on itself in folds, wings of buttery yellow damp, to become a rug. We'd skirt it, roll it, help her up, as her frightened eyes watched for my brother to lift the blue metal clasp of the gate. And he'd swing it open, and she'd dart out, rushing out the pen, shitting nervously. And she'd run back towards the scraggy hill, unused to the lightness of her body now. 2 or 3 fresh wounds in my wake, and I'd berate myself, falling to sleep that night, tossing and turning, for the clumsy, sharp cuts I'd left on her, cuts that she didn't deserve, that would sting. I'd felt woeful, embarrassed at her exhaustion, her terrified eyes staring at me, my hands wet from sweat, her particle knowledge in pieces, how to lie still, how to play dead, how to hide, how to show yourself again, when to jump up and run and run and run fast away from us. The ewe is sick, my father would say, hunt her out, bleating, hunt her in, until she dies. Until we roll up the last wool coat, gather it, twine it neatly. And I let her go. She skittered out through my hands, on past the open gate, and joined the herd, though this time she slowed to a walk, uncertain now against the strong breeze on the hill, her shorn, beating skin throbbing under my nervous hands, as she at last put her head down, grazed a little. And eventually, I could no longer feel her body under mine. And now only my own blood roused through me, coursing, hot, alive, just then rushing, whooshing, 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 until I no longer felt pain, just a gentle gushing in my ears, warm, goodbye, I have known you, I have known the way of you, now as you were, and I thanked her for all she had given us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. We're going to head over to Hilary Fannin. Hilary, are you there? Hi.
Hi, I've unmuted
Thank
myself.
you for joining us.
Well done, Candice, you're doing great. Brilliant.
Thank you so much. So Hilary, could you just give us an overall, view of The Weight of Love and your inspiration for it, please?
Sure, absolutely. The Weight of Love So essentially it's a love story told over 2 time frames, and it's a triangular love story, being there's 3 people in it. So it is essentially a story about Ruth, who goes to London, who leaves Ireland in 1996 and goes to live in London. And when she's there, she falls in love very passionately with a young Londoner who's an artist. And that relationship doesn't work out terribly well. He's a man who's troubled by his own demons, and she has a friend, Robin, who is Joseph's best friend, who's the best friend of the artist, and he's in love with her. And then we skip forward to Dublin 20 years later, and Ruth is now married to Robin. She has seemingly parted ways with the passion of her past and is living a kind of quiet, condensed life in Dublin, in a city that is quite sophisticated and quite calm, and a city that has changed hugely, as we discussed earlier, from the country that she left, socially and economically and structurally and all the rest of it. But within her, there's a sense of loss, and it's about a loss of youth. It's about a loss of potential. It's about a loss of possibility. It's about a loss of self, of somebody that she might have been. And she wakes up, and it is that moment that we sometimes have, I think, when we're maybe a little bit older, and we can wake up one day and say, "Is this it? Is this who I am?" And what about who I might have been? And what about the people that I loved once? And what about the passions that I felt then? And what have I lost? And so she retraces her steps back to London, and she finds Joseph again. And essentially it is a story about marriage, and it's a story about love, and it's a story about passion, and it's a story about sex, especially about older people and physical love. And sometimes maybe there is some kind of assumption that as we age, we settle, or we manage ourselves with a degree of dignity, which like how a lot of us do, you know. But it also questions that, you know. It also questions that, and it asks what happens to those feelings and what happens to memory, really.
Okay. So you're a playwright and a journalist. So was this did this feel very strange to you to write long form fiction?
Yeah. It did and it didn't. I mean, in a funny, you know, I am a columnist, and I began as a playwright, and I've also worked as a memoirist, and there was something really beautiful about being allowed to have the time to write long form fiction. You know, I work to deadlines all the time, 760 word deadline, another 760. It's like being in sales. I feel like I'm selling used cars, really, rather than words. And so having the kind of freedom to really take a breath and to look out and develop a story kind of slowly along 2 lines, you know, in terms of time, 2 time frames, 2 cities, and to be able to grow those atmospheres. It was very freeing, and it was kind of intoxicating. And as soon as I finished the novel, you know, having had to lie down for about 6 months, I just thought, right, I think maybe I should go again. It was good. Yeah, it was very good, really.
Okay, so we're going to have the German reading delivered by Iris Boss. It was translated by Anna-Nina Kroll, who I don't think was able to make it here tonight, but thank you, Anna-Nina. Anyway, over to you, Iris.
Yes. The Weight of Love von Hilary Fannin, übersetzt von Anna-Nina Kroll. Prolog. London, Oktober 1995. Robin schaute auf den Schulhof hinaus. Im ersten Moment traute er seinen Augen kaum. Da stand Joseph, den er völlig vergessen hatte, und unterhielt sich mit Ruth. Um die beiden herum flohen vom Klingeln erlöste Kinder aus der Schule wie freigelassene Vögel aus einem Käfig. Gebannt beobachtete Robin aus dem Lehrerzimmerfenster, wie Ruths Kopf sich neigte und ihre Stiefelspitze sich hob und über den Boden scharrte, während Joseph seine Persönlichkeit vor ihr ausbreitete. Künstler und gelegentlicher Kranker, nicht notwendigerweise in dieser Reihenfolge. Der Nieselregen rieselte ans Fenster und Robin sah seine Hoffnung auf einen Abend allein mit Ruth schwinden. »Da bist du ja«, sagte Joseph, als Robin auf sie zuging. »Ihr zwei wollt euch also einen Film im Renoir ansehen? Störe ich?« »Allerdings, Ruth, das ist Joe«, sagte Robin lustlos. »Joe ist ein alter Freund.« »Habe ich schon mitbekommen. Tässchen Tee auf dem Weg?« fragte Joseph. »Ich halte euch auch nicht lange auf. Versprochen.« Josephs Vorschlag folgend ließen die drei den Schulhof hinter sich und gingen die Church Street hinunter in ein Café, in dem sie dem Regen entkommen und ihre Vorstellungsrunde fortsetzen konnten. Während sie sich einen Weg durch die nassen Straßen bahnten, das Gespräch vom Verkehr und dem stärker werdenden Regen beschnitten, brauten sich Loyalitäten zusammen, wurden Rivalitäten geschürt. Und es wäre verlockend zu behaupten, dass alles, was geschehen würde, gewissermaßen bereits geschehen war. Dass das Lieben und das Trauern bereits angefangen und geendet hatte, als die drei auf den Warburn Walk abbogen, eine schmale Dickensche Gasse, in der ihnen das Fenster des Sorrento Café im abendlichen Dämmerlicht blassgelb entgegenleuchtete. Dabei hatten sich Ruth und Joseph an diesem Herbstabend, an dem der Regen über London fiel, in Wirklichkeit gerade erst kennengelernt. Als sie am Sorrento ankamen, das Ruth und Joseph später nur noch das kurdische Café nennen sollten, drückte Robin die Tür für Ruth auf und Joseph trat hinter ihr ein. Das Café war warm, roch säuerlich vom Wetter und sie setzten sich an einen Tisch im Erkerfenster, von wo aus sie durch die dicke Glasscheibe nasse Gehwegplatten und einen adretten kleinen Herrn mit Regenschirm durch das schmiedeiserne Tor gegenüber zum Schneider im Untergeschoss schlüpfen sehen konnten. Zwischen den dreien lag etwas Ungeformtes, Ungewisses in der Luft, das nicht allein der zweifelhaften Freiheit eines Freitagnachmittags zuzuschreiben war. Dankeschön. Jetzt freue ich mich auf die Lesung von Hilary Fannin.
Thank you. That was so lovely. That was really wonderful. Can you hear me okay? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. So Ruth, after that initial meeting, Ruth, Robin and Joseph, they go drinking for the evening in a bar in North London. And we pick up the story from here, really. So London, October 1995. The first time Ruth slept with Joseph was in his broken bed in his basement flat. The cracked slats underneath his mattress created a dip in the centre that rolled the sleepers together, or would have rolled the sleepers together had she been asleep, which she wasn't. She lay on the edge while he absorbed the hollow, arms thrown wide, head tilting towards his shoulder. He slept crucified. She put her hand on his stomach, bird light. He held his breath, she held hers. In those halted seconds, the room felt very still. Ruth took her hand away. He exhaled. She lay that first night on the rim of his bed, half submerged under city streets that nobody wanted to walk on after dark, the flat metallic taste of knife and cheese in her unwashed mouth, and wondered if she should get up, find her boots and skirt, her cardigan and tights, her coat and bag, and leave. She thought about retracing her steps along the ribboned streets he had led her through, back to Euston Road, where she could cross over to the station and wait on a bench until it was light, wait upright, her satchel on her knee, until morning commuters with clean teeth and clean underwear began to fill the concourse, and she too could begin her journey home. Home, a strange concept in this city. Ruth considered her not in considerable fear, an empty station save for the mad, the dangerous and the bereft, and weighing it against the embarrassment she would feel in the morning if she stayed until he woke to find her still there, decided to go. But in the margins of the deciding to depart and the departing, she drifted off to sleep, and when she woke again to find herself still on the lip of his bed, morning was breaking through his basement window, ice light in the boxed glass, wintering in the rotting frames. She lay, still as still, watching him, despairing now that if she moved, he might wake and not recognize her. She lay, looking at this man that she had known since 10 minutes past 4 the previous afternoon, and words like alabaster sprang to mind, and mortifyingly, the phrase carved saint floated up from somewhere, floated up from under his basement floor, wriggled up the leg of his broken bed and crawled into Ruth's ear. Carved saint, she thought, fuck's sake. The dust spores of a national affliction, the habit of sublimating desire, of wishing every gash a stigmata, must have settled on her. Careful as she'd been to shake her off, the knee-socked little girl framed on her mother's sideboard in communion dress and veil, knitting her pink rosary beads through her white-gloved fingers, must have climbed into her haversack last summer and crossed the Irish Sea to London with her. Selah.
Thank you so much, Hilary. We're going to move on now to Louise Nealon. So Louise, are you there?
Hi Candice, how are you?
Hi, thanks for joining. I'm fine, thank you very much. So Louise, could you just give us a quick overview about Snowflake? And I should just also mention Snowflake has a release date in Germany with Mara Verlag, which is the 26th of July. So that's great. We're really looking forward to that. And Anna-Nina Kroll has also translated Schneefloche.
Thanks so much. Thanks for that plug. I don't have to do it myself. I was worried about the translation of my pronunciation of the. Anyways, it's so wonderful to be here, and thank you so much to Hilary and to Elaine and Audrey for those gorgeous readings. And this whole Zoom has reminded me of being like at mass, like only instead of like listening to a priest, we're all concentrating to words that women are saying. And even though some of them are going over my head, it feels special. So thank you to the German Embassy for organizing this event. I'm afraid this my section will be very Bridget heavy because I come from Kildare, which is where Bridget hails from. And Bridget also gave me the title of my book, Snowflake. So Snowflake is about a girl who grows up on a dairy farm in County Kildare. And her mom believes that she's able to dream other people's dreams. Debbie thinks her mom is mad, and she's good reason to believe this. Her mom has had struggled with mental health difficulties all her life, and she doesn't have a great relationship with her. She is really good friends with her uncle Billy, who lives in a caravan in a field out the back of her house. And when she goes to Billy's caravan, he tells her stories. Billy is really well read, so he would have told Debbie stories about Bridget, amongst other myths. And the reason why Bridget gave me the title of my novel is I came across a Sylvia Plath poem called The Night Dances, and there's an image of a snowflake falling at the end of that poem, and I just thought it was a gorgeous word. But then as soon, like a split second after I said that'd be a great name for a title, I realized all the baggage that went along with having Snowflake as a title of a novel in the 21st century. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to contend with all that zeitgeisty stuff. But then I got really into Snowflake macro photography, and there's a guy called Alexei Kletov, I think his name is. He's Russian, and he takes photographs of Snowflake on black velvet, and they're microscopic, but one of them was shaped exactly like a St. Bridget's cross. I'll throw a picture of it and a link to it in the chat. But that was the reason for me to go with Snowflake as a title. It felt like a sign, because for me, Bridget, like St. Bridget, like I chose her as my communion name. She's my Joan of Arc. I absolutely adore everything that she stands for, and feel like a real spiritual connection with her. So this event is really, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you, Louise. So we'll go over to Kate Ferguson, who will deliver the German reading, the German translation, which was translated by Anna-Nina Kroll, who I saw has just entered. So hello, Anna-Nina, it's great that you could make it. Nearly just on time. We just had the previous reading of The Weight of Love by Iris Voss, which was also a fabulous translation. So over to you, Kate.
Danke, Candice. Und wie schon erwähnt, dieser Roman erscheint auf Deutsch am 26. Juli im Mare Verlag. Der Wohnwagen. Mein Onkel Billy lebt in einem Wohnwagen auf dem Feld hinter unserem Haus. Als ich zum ersten Mal einen Wohnwagen auf der Straße sah, dachte ich, ein anderes Kind, hätte ihn entführt. Erst da erfuhr ich, dass Wohnwagen eigentlich dazu gedacht sind, bewegt zu werden. Billys Wohnwagen fuhr nirgendwo hin. Unverrückbar stand er auf einem Fundament aus Betonklötzen, immer da, seit dem Tag meiner Geburt. Als Kind besuchte ich Billy oft, wenn ich Angst vor dem Einschlafen hatte. Er sagte, ich dürfe nur aus dem Haus kommen, wenn ich den Mond von meinem Fenster aus sehen könne und ihm Wünsche aus dem Garten mitbrächte. In der Nacht meines 8. Geburtstags sauste ich beim Anblick des dicken, runden Mondes die Treppe hinunter und durch die Hintertür hinaus. Spürte das nasse Gras an den nackten Füßen, die Dornen der Hecke haschten nach mir, zerrten an den Ärmeln meines Schlafanzugs. Ich wusste, wo die Wünsche sich herumtrieben. Ein Grüppchen wuchs gleich beim Wohnwagen hinter der Hecke. Ich pflückte einen nach dem anderen, genoss das leise Reißen der Stängel, den klebrig aus dem abgetrennten Ende tropfenden Saft, die fluffig aneinanderstoßenden weißen Köpfe. Ich hielt die Hand davor, wie um Kerzen vor Wind zu schützen, damit ich auch je kein Wunschbüschel an die Nacht verlor. Beim Sammeln wirbelte ich die Silben im Kopf herum. Löwenzahn, Löwenzahn, Löwenzahn. Am selben Tag hatten Billy und ich das Wort in dem großen Wörterbuch unter seinem Bett nachgeschlagen. Dandelion hieß es auf Englisch. Das käme von französischen Dents de Lion, erklärte Billy, den Zähnen des Löwen eben. Der Löwenzahn begann sein Leben als hübsches Ding. Die Blätter seines Rocks spitz und gelb wie ein Tutu. Das ist das Kleid für tagsüber, aber irgendwann muss die Blüte schlafen gehen. Sie verwelkt, sieht müde und abgezehrt aus, und wenn man gerade meint, ihre Zeit wäre abgelaufen, Billy ballte eine Hand zur Faust, verwandelte sie sich in eine Pusteblume. Er streckte die Finger und zauberte eine weiße Pusteblume hinter dem Rücken hervor, die aussah wie aus Zuckerwatte. Ein Flauschmond, eine heilige Gemeinschaft der Wünsche. Er ließ mich die Wünsche auspusten wie Geburtstagskerzen. Ein Sternbild der Träume. Billy staunte über den Pusteblumenstrauß, den ich ihm hinhielt, als er die Wohnwagentür aufmachte. Ich hatte so viele gepflückt, wie ich noch finden konnte, um ihn zu beeindrucken. Ich wusste es, sagte er. Ich habe genau gewusst, dass der Mond zu deinem Geburtstag rauskommt. Wir füllten ein leeres Marmeladenglas mit Wasser und pusteten die flauschigen Löwenzahnköpfe hinein. Die Federn trieben hinter den gebogenen Samen wie winzige Rückenschwimmer. Ich schraubte den Deckel auf das Glas und schüttelte die Wünsche durch, ließ sie hochleben, schaute ihm beim Tanzen zu. Wir stellten das Glas auf einen klammen Zeitungsstapel, damit es auf dem Plastikfenster des Wohnwagens schauen konnte. Billy machte einen Topf Milch auf dem Gasherd warm. Seine Küche sah aus wie ein Spielzeug, das ich mir zu Weihnachten wünschte. Ich war jedes Mal überrascht, dass sie wirklich funktionierte. Ich durfte die Milch umrühren, bis sie blubberte und eine weiße Haut bildete, die ich mit dem Löffelrücken abschöpfte. Er kippte Kakaopulver hinein und ich rührte und rührte, bis mir der Arm fast abfiel. Die dampfende braune Flüssigkeit schütteten wir schließlich in eine Thermosflasche und nahmen sie mit aufs Dach zum Sternegucken. Es dauerte mehrere Tage, bis die Löwenzahnsamen komplett untergegangen waren. Sie hielten sich an der Oberfläche, hingen von ihrem Wasserhimmel, bis sie entweder aufgaben oder ihnen zu langweilig wurde. Und wenn die Welt sie längst aufgegeben hatte, erschienen winzige grüne Triebe, als wären sie Pflanzenmeerjungfrauen, denen unter Wasser Schwänze wuchsen. Dann rief Billy mich rüber, um die sturen kleinen Dinger zu bewundern, die sich weigerten zu sterben. Vielen Dank. Und nun hören wir von Louise Nealon.
Thank you so much, Kate, and thank you to Anna-Nina as well for the wonderful translation. Sticking with my Brigid's theme, I'm going to read a bit in the book where Brigid's crosses pop up. Every spring, Mom picks reeds in the field beside our house and makes St. Brigid's crosses for the whole parish. At the beginning of February, she brings a wicker basket full of crosses to Mass, and the priest thanks her from the altar. When I was 7, I tried to help her. The field where the rushes grow is called a swamp, a childhood in-between place where my boots squelched, and I was never sure if the grass surrounding me was land or lake. I used to imagine hippos submerged in the mud behind a clump of reeds. Mom snipped the reeds with scissors, tied them in bunches, and put them into a hessian sack. I trailed along behind her, trying to pull up the reeds myself, but they were too stubborn to move. Usually, the more I tried to please Mom, the less patience she had with me. But she tolerated me this time, because Grandad was moving fences nearby. When I asked her if I could help, she let me drag the sack of reeds after her. We went back inside the house with the rushes. I tried my best not to make any noise, but even my silence annoyed her. Go outside and play, Debbie. But I want to help. I don't need any help. Please, Ma'am, I'll be very good. I haven't time to teach you how. I already know how. We made them in school with pipe cleaners. I smiled at her, triumphant. She picked the rushes off the table and started to walk towards the room, carrying the bundle into her chest like a baby. I want to help, Mammy, please. I started crying and she began to run. I chased her down the corridor, put out my hand to stop her from closing the door, but she slammed it. A black pain shot up my hand. I lost the tops of 2 fingers that day, the middle and ring fingers of my left hand. Billy brought me to the hospital. When we arrived back home, Mom didn't acknowledge my injury, but she made me a cup of tea. Later that night, she slid a letter under my pillow while I was sleeping. It was disguised as an apology, but really, She explained how it was my own fault. Mom brought the St. Bridget's crosses to Mass that Sunday, and the priest thanked her from the altar. People took one home on their way out of the church. The crosses were put over doorways to protect houses from harm. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you, Kate, for a wonderful reading. And now we're going to head over to Olivia Fitzsimons. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, how are you?
Thanks for joining us. And your book, The Quiet Whispers Never Stop, will be out in April in Ireland. And it's not yet set for a German release yet. Auf Deutsch. So we've translated with Hans Christian Oeser has translated the opening excerpt of The Quiet Whispers Never Stop. So just could you let us know, sort of like give us an overview of the book?
Yeah, here it is here. This is The Quiet Whispers Never Stop. It's my debut, and thanks so much for having me here tonight. Happy St. Bridget's Day, everybody. The Quiet Whispers Never Stop is a story about a mother and a daughter, and it's set in Northern Ireland in the 1980s and 1990s. And really, it's about difficult women in a difficult place. I wanted to look at women's lives and move the narrative away from the Troubles. And I hope I've managed to do that in the book. So I'm giving you a very brief introduction. But yeah, it's a story that's really important to me, and because it's a place that I thought I'd never write about. I didn't expect to write about Northern Ireland. And today, when we think about moving from darkness into light, I've been thinking about these complex women in literature and the messy, flawed lives that they lead. And it's really good to see these women in books, and they've been written about in the past, but I feel like there's a big wave of women coming forward and writing about these stories that need to be told, especially in the North.
Okay, so we're going to go over to Iris Boss for a reading from the translation of the opening segment by Hans Christian Oeser, and then we'd love to hear a reading from you, Olivia. Thank you.
The Quiet Whisper Never Stop von Olivia Fitzsimons, übersetzt von Hans Christian Oeser. Eine 7-Tage-Woche, die Sonne und der Mond. Sam, 1994. Schwierig. Sie hat es satt, ihren Vater das sagen zu hören. So ein schwieriges Mädchen hat er sich nie gewünscht. Die ganze Zeit wird ihr immer nur gesagt, wie verzogen sie ist, dass Patsy sie zu sehr verhätschelt. Ob es zutraf oder nicht, spielte keine Rolle. Genau wie ihre Mutter, vermutete sie. Sie überlegt, ob der gut aussehende Kerl, der sie im Auge behält, ebenfalls schwierig ist. Er sieht ganz so aus. Er ist älter, viel älter als die anderen Jungs. Schuljungen, die sie recht gut kennt, die neben ihr hertrotten und über Gigs, Diskos oder irgendeinen anderen Scheiß reden. Er sitzt einfach nur vor der Stadtbücherei im Zentrum von Downpatrick und hält Hof. Zwar ist es nur ein armseliges Königreich von Drückebergern, trotzdem ist er der King. Seine Augen, flüssige, schimmernde Tümpeldunkelheit, bewegen sich katzengleich. Sein Haar ist rabenschwarz, sein Kinn ein Bleistiftstrich über dem Hals. Er hat etwas so Schroffes, dass sie bei dem Gedanken daran nervös lachen muss. Sie weiß von seinem Freund Murph, der dieselbe Schärfe hat, aber nichts von seiner Großtuerei. Der ist noch nicht kompakt genug, auch nur so ein schlachsiger Jüngling, dessen Ehrgeiz sein Selbstbild täglich übersteigt. Es muss seltsam sein, denkt sie, ein bestimmtes Bild von sich zu haben und etwas ganz anderes vorzufinden. In ihrer Schule ist dauernd die Rede davon, dass man sich selbst kennen muss. Als wäre das bei irgendwem der Fall. Alle paar Monate wechselt sie mit billigen Färbemitteln ihre Haarfarbe, nur um so zu tun, als ob. Sie weiß weniger als die meisten, wer sie ist. Es fehlt ihr was. Dieser Typ kennt sich, so viel steht fest. Er ist sich seiner sicher, so wie der Wochentage. Man hat einen Namen für diese 24 Stunden, doch die Gestalt, die Form, die sie annehmen könnten, diese Stunden, Minuten, Sekunden, die kennt man nicht. Die überraschen einen ständig. Sie kommen jede Woche, ob man will oder nicht, und man muss sie leben. Wieder und wieder. Pazys Seite des Bergs. Patsy 1982. Jeder wusste, dass Fionnuala eine neurotische Frau war. Patsy aber liebte sie. Hatte er schon immer getan und würde es immer tun. Vielleicht hätte er es ihr öfter sagen sollen, aber er war nicht die Sorte, die gern redet. Er trank auch nicht viel. Und das machte ihn zu einem Sonderling. Denn er war Abstinenzler, ging jeden Sonntag zur Messe und konnte noch immer einen 20 Jahre jüngeren Mann überholen. In den Zeitungen stand, er sei Karatemeister. Karate. Was für ein saudummer Ignorant hatte das denn geschrieben? Die kriegten ihre Fakten nicht auf die Reihe. Judo. Seinen schwarzen Gürtel hatte er im Judo. An diesem Morgen war er wie üblich losgegangen, um die Kühe in den Stall zu treiben, und hatte den Kleinen mitgenommen. Patsy John liebte die Kühe. Patsy konnte die Sanftheit in der Hand seines Sohnes sehen. Schon als Knirps war er ruhig und gemessen. Eines Tages würde er einen guten Landwirt abgeben. Er würde den Hof übernehmen. Nicht, dass es da noch viel zu bewirtschaften gab. Das meiste war verprasst worden, bevor er ihn seinem betrunkenen Bruder abkaufte. Im ersten Morgenlicht trug er den Kleinen auf den Schultern, eine Hand auf dem Jungen, in der anderen Tee. Als sie beim Stall ankamen, dessen Holzlatten sich kaum vom aufhellenden Himmel abhoben, schüttete Patsy den letzten Tropfen kalten Tees aus seinem Blechbecher. Noch herrschte dichtes Dunkel. Es weigerte sich, dem Morgen zu weichen. Er setzte den Kleinen auf den Pfeiler. Normalerweise musste er gar nicht erst rufen, damit die Kühe herbeikamen, getrieben von der Routine und dem Geruch ihrer Herren. Doch an diesem Morgen war verzweifeltes Gebrüll zu hören. Die trächtige Kuh blieb in der Ecke der Weide stehen, ein paar andere hatten sich um sie geschart. Er wusste sofort, dass sie Beistand brauchte, merkte es am Klang ihrer Stimme. Zuerst aber trieb er die anderen in den Stall und bereitete sie, so schnell er konnte, zum Melken vor. Patsy überlegte, ob er zum Haus gehen und seine Frau holen solle. Aber dann würde die Tochter mitkommen, und die war so sprunghaft, dass nichts in ihrer Nähe sich beruhigen würde. Dankeschön. Ich freue mich jetzt auf die englische Lesung.
Thank you so much. It was lovely to hear. Thank you. I'm going to read now an early chapter from Vanilla, which is set in 1981. It's called Louis Vanilla. Patsy has started getting the paper delivered as a treat. It is sweet, really. He knows I love to read, and I suppose it is his way of keeping me satisfied, in touch with the outside world, while my inner life leaks out of me like excess breast milk. I know he thinks I should stop, that I'm too attached to the children. What he means is that I'm not attached enough to him. Men, they love the idea of things, the dream of a thing, not the mess, not the lived-in insomniac chant, the stink of raising their want. They want children, then they don't. They want you to open your mouth, then they don't. They long for offspring, mini versions of themselves, little men to take over, little girls to give away. They long for the future. They ignore the now, the present, the need, the lack. They just keep moving forward while we are expected to stand still, wait, never catch up. I want more. I'm not expecting a visitor when I answered the knock on the door with PJ attached to me. Patsy, the dope, has forgotten as usual to tell me anyone was calling. An hour earlier, I'd been sitting in a shallow bath with my children, trying to ease the relentless wave of tiredness, while Sam's hair fanned out like seagrass and sooty droplets ran off PJ's plump little stomach when he kicked his legs. Sam protested as I got out with her brother, the water gone cold like my coffee. Afterwards, she fought sleep, her damp face defiant. Her grisly cries ate at me. She wanted me all to herself. I waited to check on her, dressed her little brother, let herself soothe like the book said, even if it felt wrong. I was so tired. I put PJ in the bouncer, went into her, felt her little hot breaths on my fingertips, settled at last. Will I put clothes on today for a change? What do you say, Baba? PJ sucked his fingers and watched me with big eyes as I pulled out an expensive flowery dress I loved. The coloured material seemed inadequate, held against a body bowed to motherhood and all its scars. But when I slipped it on, I fitted into a younger, brighter, carefree version of myself. He cooed at me, my easy baby. I hate that term, but it's true. I lay on the floor beside his giddy, moving chair, and suddenly I didn't look as bad as I'd felt in months. But then he reached for me, his cry demanding, and I was a mother again, the feeling I had for myself lost. I fell asleep nursing PJ on the floor. The knock wakes me up. When I open the door, the baby moves off me to look at our visitor, a youth. He sees my nipple, hard, dark, open, a trickle of milk rolling down my breast. His eyes sweep down to take me in, but he isn't embarrassed, gazes at me, openly curious. It feels like being seen again. The timid redness barely touches his sallow skin, but those eyes, brown and endless, as he steps closer, reaches up emotions to pull the dress around me. I instinctively catch his fingers, grasp them for just a moment. He doesn't pull his hand away. The gentleness of his touch, it strikes me as so perfect, beguiling tenderness from a breeze of a boy. There is only the breath of baby between us. He comes in kissing close, then hands me the paper, eyes firmly on mine. It is all there then, all of what might become. Right there in that moment, we both decide what is going to happen. That sun-speckled morning is the start. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you, Iris, vielen Dank, Iris, for the great reading, the great readings, excuse me. And we're going to go over to Roisin Kiberd now. And just to note, we have seen loads of the questions coming in the chat box, and I see there's a hand raised. If we do have time, we're running a little bit over time. So if we do have time, we will endeavour to get to your questions, and do keep writing them in the chat box in any case, because it's really interesting and great to have this sort of conversation happening there as well. So sorry, hi Roisin.
Hello, it's wonderful to be here in such good company.
Yeah, it's wonderful to have you, and yeah, it's an amazing lineup. So just, yeah, could you give us a sort of an overview of The Disconnect? It's the one book tonight that's not long form fiction. So was it a memoir or cultural criticism, or yeah, tell us more about it.
It's a weird hybrid of both, I would say. This is The Disconnect. It works as a collection of essays, but they also link together into a bigger narrative. And the subtitle of the book is A Personal Journey Through the Internet. It's a sort of odyssey through all of the strange subcultures in online life. And it's also my way of making sense of my own relationship to the internet, and I think everyone else's. It's been interesting listening over the course of the last hour about how I think Hilary and Elaine talked about Ireland as a changing place. And I think in a sense, my book is about that too, because if you look at the last 10 years, they've been defined in Ireland by the presence of tech companies here. Every major tech company in the world is here with the European HQ. And then the other side of it is that the internet is a human story. I have a lot of love for writing that looks inward and outward. And I think that if we were to write about how the internet is affecting us, how social media is affecting us, surveillance, internalized surveillance, what it means to live with all of these things changing around us so much, it is at once a big cultural story and a personal story. So I put a lot of myself into this book, and I kind of feel like I put a lot out there. But I also wanted to take stock of this much broader moment in time. So pieces of the book cover everything from, there's one on just Mark Zuckerberg, on the enigma of Mark Zuckerberg. It's called Bland God. There's a chapter on vaporwave music, which inspired the cover, this kind of mad technicolor face here. Vaporwave is, I would say, a genre of music native to the internet. And there's also a lot on dating apps. I'm going to actually read a section from that in a minute after the translated part.
Can I just ask you quickly as well, because you were based in Berlin, or you are currently based in Berlin, and you have been for a number of years. Did living here inspire it, or did it make its way in?
The next thing I write is set in Berlin. Or, well, I'm writing, but no, because I only moved, the book actually ends with me moving to Berlin, because that's just how it worked out. I started it out, it's also a love story. I'm trying to I feel like I'm saying this book is so many different things, but it's all of these things factor into this theme of the internet, because in the book I talk about falling in love with someone over the internet, and eventually I moved to Berlin, and we've been back and forth ever since. But I did definitely find when I went there that attitudes to tech are completely different to attitudes in Ireland. And I think it's fascinating as a culture and what history can do to that. You would think that in Ireland we'd be more wary of surveillance, talking about colonization. I think we are, but in more recent times, we've welcomed it, and we've welcomed every major tech company in the world. And it does kind of filter down into our culture in these tiny ways. Part of my inspiration for writing this book was a kind of frustration with the fact that studies of all of this don't capture what it is. It's this extremely nuanced cultural shift in our minds and in how we relate to each other. And, what is the self in the age of the internet? What are our relationships in the age of the internet? The only way to really explore that, I felt, was by putting a lot of my own life on the line as well in this book.
Great. Okay, so we'll go over to Iris Boss for a reading of the opening excerpt translated by Hans Christian Oeser.
The Disconnect, a personal journey through the Internet. Von Roisin Kiberd, übersetzt von Hans Christian Oeser. Prolog. Ich bin das neue Fleisch. Ich lebe unter der Herrschaft der Technologie und die Technologie ist ein Teil von mir. Den Begriff das neue Fleisch habe ich aus Videodrome gestohlen, David Cronenbergs Horrorfilm aus dem Jahre 1983, da er am besten beschreibt, wie ich mich fühle. In diesem Film werden Menschen verändert durch die Medien, die sie konsumieren. Sie mutieren, schwanken zwischen Euphorie und Grauen. Der Bildschirm macht so süchtig, wirkt so hypnotisierend, dass sie immer wieder zu ihm zurückkehren, bis er ihre Gedanken verzerrt und ihre Menschlichkeit bedroht. Auch ich bin süchtig nach dem Bildschirm. Manchmal glaube ich, so viel Zeit meines Lebens online verbracht zu haben, dass ich vom Internet aufgezogen worden bin. Ich habe vergessen, wo die Grenzen verlaufen, wo die Technologie aufhört und wo ich anfange. Bin ich ein Mutant, ein Cyborg oder nur ein ganz gewöhnlicher Mensch? Ein Cyborg ist eine Person, deren physische Fähigkeiten durch Technologie erweitert wurden. Meine Erweiterungen sind nicht physischer Natur. Mein Körper sieht weitgehend so aus wie der eines Menschen, der vor dem Internetzeitalter gelebt hat. Aber ich bin ein emotionaler Cyborg. Meine Meinungen, meine Erinnerungen und meine Identität lagere ich ins Internet aus und mit meinem Laptop habe ich mehr Zeit verbracht als mit irgendeinem Lebewesen auf der Erde. Dieser Zustand ist nicht ungewöhnlich. Ich bin überzeugt, dass diese Erfahrung auch von mehreren Milliarden anderer Menschen auf der Welt, die das Internet nutzen, gemacht wird. Unsere Nutzung von Technologie verändert uns auf eine Weise, die wir erst noch begreifen müssen. Früher wurde behauptet, das Internet werde uns befreien. Techno-Utopisten behaupteten, das Leben online werde es uns ermöglichen, Geschlecht, Alter, Klasse und Rasse zu transzendieren und unsere eigene Identität zu konstruieren. Bewahrheitet hat sich dies nicht. Stattdessen wurden wir zu fixen Identitäten verleitet. Jedem Menschen eine eigene Biografie, Zeitleiste und Filterblase zugewiesen. Vielleicht bin ich eine Technodystopistin. Im Laufe der Jahre habe ich eine schleichende Entpersönlichung erlebt, abgeschnitten von der Realität, von Aufrichtigkeit und Sinneseindrücken, fühlte ich mich gezwungen, in einer Welt des Scrollens zu konkurrieren. Ich war hin und her gerissen. Manchmal wollte ich das ideale Datensubjekt sein, dann wieder misstraute ich der Technologie, selbst als ich ihre Tendenz zur Überwachung gegen mich selbst richtete. Vielleicht bin ich weder ein Cyborg noch ein Mutant, sondern eine gespaltene Persönlichkeit. Solange ich ein Leben in Daten habe, habe ich auch eine Doppelgängerin. Jeder hat einen Doppelgänger, einen Schatten, der in Listen und Systemen existiert, in Informationen, die in Datenfarmen gespeichert werden, auf Servern, die im Dunkeln zischen und blinken. Das Internet spürt uns nach und setzt ein zweites Ich zusammen. Und jede unserer Interaktionen mit einem Dienstleister oder einer Plattform trägt zu diesem Profil bei und wird von Fremden zu Geld gemacht. Ein Beispiel. Noch bevor man sich bei Facebook anmeldet, hat Facebook bereits ein Schattenprofil erstellt. Eine Leere, die darauf wartet, gefüllt zu werden. Wir leben in Daten und doch tun wir es nicht, denn Daten sind wie tote Zellen, die unser Körper abstößt. Das Internet füttert uns mit dem, was es für unsere Wünsche hält, basierend auf dem, was wir in der Vergangenheit gewünscht haben. Das bedeutet, dass unsere Doppelgänger nichtssagende und vorhersehbare Chiffren sind, die bornierteste Version von uns selbst. Jedes Mal, wenn wir das Internet nutzen, werden unsere Doppelgänger stärker. Bestimmt werden sie uns eines Tages überleben. Sie gehören uns nicht. Künstliche Intelligenz ist die Technologie, die unsere Zukunft beherrschen wird. Und sie wird auf den Daten beruhen, die wir für die Technologieunternehmen heute erzeugen. Manche behaupten, dass wir noch zu unseren Lebzeiten den Zeitpunkt der technologischen Singularität erleben werden. Eine Intelligenzexplosion, bei der Maschinen die menschlichen Fähigkeiten für immer in den Schatten stellen werden. Er wird als Beginn einer Science-Fiction-Ära, als Apokalypse oder als Freisetzung nahezu unbegrenzter Möglichkeiten beschrieben. Wie aber soll aus einem Internet, das von einem Überwachungskapitalismus beherrscht wird, eine technologische oder gar spirituelle Revolution entstehen? Wird die Zukunft auf unserer Nutzlosigkeit und Zerstreuung beruhen? Auf dem, was die Technologie uns nimmt, ebenso wie auf dem, was sie uns bietet? Diese Singularität wird langweilig sein, denn schon das heutige Internet ist langweilig. Vor einer von Menschenhand geschaffenen Dystopie wird uns die Singularität nicht retten. Dankeschön. Ja, ich freue mich jetzt auf Roisin Kiberds englische Lesung.
Thank you, Iris, and thank you, Hans, for translating. There were so many fascinating German words in that, including singularity and apocalypse. Subject of apocalypses. I'm going to read from the chapter in the book about dating apps, and it's called Men Explain the Apocalypse to Me. It's autumn 2018, and I'm sitting alone in my childhood bedroom, waiting for signs of the eschaton. Apocalypse predictions come and go. This year has had plenty. Nostradamus promised World War III, global economic collapse, a series of earthquakes in America, and the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Another apocalypse prophet, David Mead, the author of books including Rapture 2015 and Planet X, the 2017 arrival, the coming Clinton economic collapse, and the end of days, Planet X and beyond, predicted that the rapture would take place in 2018, shortly after North Korea became a superpower. Meanwhile, two asteroids, only the size of a jumbo jet and the other the size of a car, narrowly passed Earth in September at a distance closer than the moon, but did not collide. Now it's November. 6 weeks remain for the predictions to come true. If the apocalypse really is about to take place, then I don't want to be raptured alone. Over the last few years, I've had several short-term relationships, rarely lasting longer than a few months. Those fell away, pleasant enough experiences that nonetheless left me feeling more alone than before. The problem has been that in the 3 years since he broke up with me, I've thought about my ex every day. It feels like I have no future without him. I think of him constantly, and these thoughts have coalesced into a layer between me and the world, preventing me from forming a meaningful connection with anyone else. It hasn't helped that he keeps writing me emails. I speak to him almost every day, but he doesn't want to date me. He wants to exchange hundreds, perhaps thousands of messages, and to keep me at arm's length. This, too, is a pleasant enough relationship. My ex no longer lives in Dublin, but I know he's there, a name beside an unread notification, ready to talk about films and books, politics, cultural theory, and the apocalypse. We talk a lot about that. Back in 2016, we were only together for a few months, but now years have passed. In one way, he restored my faith in technology as a way to bring people together. In another, I interpret his messages as a sign that I'll die alone, after dedicating years to a spectre in my inbox. The love I have for him, and I know it's love, it's been long enough, is unwieldy. I have so much, I don't know what to do with it. It would be a terrible thing to let it die inside me without reaching its target. I feel like a nun wedded to the internet. I pour love into writing the perfect email, night after night, uncertain if he will ever love me back. Sometimes I wonder if it's this system I love, the writing, the mediation, the ritual, and the safety of distance, rather than the person who receives the message. Our relationship, perhaps not a relationship in a conventional sense, but a kind of connection still, developed in the years after I was given my mental illness diagnosis, a time when, on some level at least, I concluded that I was unlovable and unsuited to serious relationships. I resent the ambivalence between us, which email leaves permanently open, but at times I also find it comforting. It provides the possibility of love without the need to take responsibility for it. In my parents' house in Dublin, it feels like a lifetime has gone by and I have nothing to show for it. I know that I'm frozen in obsessive patterns. I need to tell him how I feel or move on. I need to connect with someone in real life and step away from the screen. Winter closes in, a landscape of hot whiskies and parties, anticipation, loneliness, and cold. My mind changes. I begin to believe that I can compartmentalize my dating life, channeling love into daily emails, while finding more casual relationships through apps. I decide that going out with men from the internet will be good for me. It might even take my mind off my ex. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roisin, and thank you again, Iris and Hans Christian Oeser. So we are moving on now to Wendy Erskine. Hi, Wendy.
Hi there, Candy, how are you?
I'm grand, thanks. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Great. We're sorry we're going a little bit over time, but I think we're actually like doing pretty well. So yeah, tell us about Dance Move.
Okay, so Dance Move, this is it here. This is published by Sting and Fly Press, and it is a collection of 11 short stories. And so it's probably easiest to kind of tell you a little bit about some of the people that you would encounter in these short stories. So the very first one is about a woman called Roberta who cleans Airbnbs in Belfast. And at one of these Airbnbs, she finds a child that has been left over from a party. And so that story deals with the relationship that these two end up having, Roberta and the little child. And then there would be Mrs. D'Alessandro, who enjoys secretly going to a tanning salon, but she goes to a tanning salon partly to get a tan, but also because it kind of reminds her of a sort of a teenage sex encounter that she had. And then another one would be Nostalgia, which is about an old 80s pop singer who is invited, very surprisingly, he's invited by an organisation to their centenary, and they want him to sing a song that he regards as totally obscure. And when he gets there, he realizes that this is actually a pretty sinister organisation, and he was in a bit of an ego trip going across to Northern Ireland to hear them sing this song. And he, ends up regrets doing it. So all different sorts of people. A friend, Wayne, described it as sort of like cosmic quotidian. So that's what these stories are like, very ordinary in some ways, and in other ways really kind of extraordinary, I suppose, some of the things that happen in them. So that's about it.
And Kate, the ballet dancer, is the excerpt that we have in German.
Yeah. So the title story is called Dance Move, and it's about a woman, Kate, who basically gets very, very disturbed by seeing her 13-year-old girl and her friend dance along to it's actually Cardi B. They dance along to, and she is appalled at seeing her daughter dance in a fairly sexualized way, even though she's quite a young teenager. So it becomes a whole story about repression and teenagers, but it's also as well, really, to be honest, Candice, about not being able to dance. So the whole collection is called Dance Move, but it's really about a person who it's dance and movement, but also in a really metaphorical way, in the sense that this is a person who can't actually move. And at the very end of the story, she goes to a teenage rave, this woman, this mother, and she ends up stuck, and she's stuck in quite a literal and metaphorical way. So the stories are quite sad, but they're also quite funny. That's basically it.
Fantastic. So we'll go over to Iris, who will read the excerpt of that particular story that was translated by Hans Christian Oeser.
Dance Move von Wendy Erskine, Übersetzung Hans Christian Oeser. Eine Frau, die Kate kennt, hat an einem Pooldance-Kurs für Einsteiger teilgenommen. Am Ende des 6-wöchigen Kurses gab es, außer einem Zertifikat, eine Abendveranstaltung für Familienangehörige und Freunde. Ein Video davon stellte das Studio ins Internet. Auch das noch, sagte Kate. Das können sich doch alle möglichen Leute ansehen. Sollen sie nur, erwiderte die Frau, wenn sie Lust dazu haben, mir doch egal. Heute sieht sich Kate Balletttänzerinnen an. Das Video trägt den Titel Die 15 Besten der Welt. Auf einer riesigen schwarzen Bühne macht eine Frau sittsam kleine Schritte. Das nächste Video. Eine Frau in einem Hauch von Chiffon tanzt vor einer Kulisse mit unechten Steinstufen und einem Fresko. Kate sucht nach sexuell aufgeladenem, modernem Ballett, um mal zu schauen, was sich da so findet. Ein Paar, beide in weißen Hemden und schwarzen Unterhosen, umklammert sich, löst sich und umklammert sich von neuem. Geschmackvoll. In der näheren Umgebung werden Tanzkurse angeboten, falls Clara das möchte. Als Kate anruft, sagt man ihr, im Ballettkurs für Anfänger seien keine Plätze mehr frei. Wie wär's mit Stepptanz, schlägt man ihr vor. Nein. Und was ist mit Modern Dance und Hip-Hop? Nein, sagt Kate entschiedener. Dann lass ich's. Wenigstens ist Claras Zimmer jetzt fertig. Das modulare Bett und den Schreibtisch hat Kate selbst zusammengebaut. Dem Raumgestalter, der das Zimmer an einem Samstagmorgen neu tapeziert hat, als außer Leon und ihr niemand da war, hat sie das Doppelte gezahlt. Die Wände bestehen jetzt aus winzigen Zweigen auf blassblauem Grund, passend zum Bettzeug. In das Regal ihrer Tochter hat sie ein paar ihrer eigenen Bücher gestellt, damit die Bretter nicht so leer wirken. Für eine 13-Jährige ist es ein sauberes und ordentliches Schlafzimmer. Ellen fragte sich, ob sie Clara bei den Farben nicht hätte hinzuziehen und zwischen ein paar Tapetenmustern hätte wählen lassen sollen. Als Clara am Nachmittag zurückkehrte, sagte Kate, schau mal nach oben. Geh schon, du wirst es nicht glauben. Clara ging nach oben und kam wieder herunter. Ja, du hast 100%ig recht, sagte sie. Ich kann's nicht glauben. Ein paar Tage später, als Kate ins Zimmer trat Um die Schmutzwäsche zu holen, sah sie, dass an der Wand mit einem schmuddeligen Klumpen Bluttack befestigt das gedruckte Bild eines Mannes hing. Aus seinem Mund quoll Rauch, sein Haar war zu bunten Zöpfen geflochten und er hatte regenbogenfarbene Zähne. Sein Gesicht war tätowiert, auf der Stirn stand in gotischer Schrift 69. Kate wusste, dass das Bild von ihrem Drucker stammte, denn da war dieser dicke, vertikale gelbe Balken, der immer dann zu sehen war, wenn die Tinte zu Neige ging. Sorgfältig entfernte sie das Bluttack, faltete den Bogen scharf zusammen und legte ihn auf den Schreibtisch. Als Clara in die Küche kam, um sich etwas zu essen zu holen, sagte Kate: Bitte verschwende nicht meine Tinte. Was meinst du damit? Tinte verschwenden, Blödsinn drucken. Clara öffnete den Kühlschrank und schaute hinein. Ich glaube, ich werde mal herumtelefonieren, sagte Kate, wegen Tanzunterricht. Warum nicht? Ja, Ballett. Wenn du Bock drauf hast. In diesem Haus gibt's nie was Ordentliches zu essen. Nein, ich habe mir überlegt, dass Ballett eine gute Sache für dich wäre. Langsam schloss Clara die Kühlschranktür. Melde du dich zum Ballett an, sagte sie. Ich habe kein Interesse daran, 0 Interesse an Balletttanz. Und dann, innerhalb weniger Tage, tauchte ein weiteres Bild derselben Person auf, diesmal von besserer Qualität. Der Mann mit der 69 auf der Stirn lehnte mit nacktem Oberkörper an einem Jeep und hielt ein Bündel Geldscheine in der Hand. Diesmal war das Bild mit Tesafilm angeklebt worden. Wie teuer der Raumgestalter gewesen war. Millimeter für Millimeter schob Kate ihren Fingernagel unter den Klebefilm. Auf der Türschwelle stand Clara und beobachtete sie. Was tust du da? Du siehst ja wohl, was ich tue. Übrigens habe ich das in der Schule ausgedruckt vor den Ferien. Um deine Tinte brauchst du dir keine Sorgen zu machen. Schön, dass das Schulbudget Schülern erlaubt, Bilder von unerwünschten Personen auszudrucken, wann immer sie wollen. Kate konnte sehen, dass, wenn sie fortführe, das Bild abzulösen, die rechte untere Ecke die Tapete einreißen würde. Bist du fertig? Fragte Clara. Dankeschön.
Iris, thank you so much. That sounded absolutely wonderful to me. It really did. And thank you so much, Hans Christian, for the translation. It sounded just terrific to me. I'm going to read a little bit from a story called Memento Mori, and it's just from the very, very beginning of this story. So I don't think I need to explain anything to you. Really, we'll just start from the very beginning. Memento Mori. The books in the library are fairly limited, mainly true crime and thrillers. Every so often, Gillian fills in a transfer request for titles of interest, and within 3 or 4 weeks, they come. Most frequently, she asks for books about gardens because, although there's a small plot here, opportunities are limited. In terms of other reading material, it usually takes a couple of days before she gets the Sunday paper, but she's used to that now. And anyway, she focuses so little on the actual news that it wouldn't matter, a paper 1 week, 2 weeks old. On the last page of the magazine supplement, a woman, in response to a problem or supposed difficulty, gives circumlocutory and banal advice that spans a number of paragraphs. Tracy used to read it out loud every Sunday. She'd be lying on the sofa and the fire would be lit. Her own counsel was blunt. My advice to this person is basically to wise the fuck up, she'd say. Gillian pretended to wince, but really, in most circumstances, it would have been beneficial for the people to take heed. Yet there were times when someone who seemed a prime candidate for harsh pragmatism was treated with a degree of kindness because he or she reminded Tracy of somebody she used to know in London, in Liverpool, in other lives. And so when Gillian eventually does get the Sunday paper on a Tuesday or Wednesday, she reads the problem page first and thinks of Tracy. Tracy used to say, Gillian, what in the name of God did you do before you met me? It surprised her that Gillian had been with so few people. Gillian always replied that she had simply been waiting for her. Thinking now, that does seem the way of it. Sitting in a cafe in a foreign city, watching a young couple in the park, in the dark of the cinema, when she had to put down a book because its evocation of some or other passion was so acute. She had all along been dreaming of Tracy, although she had yet to meet her. Tracy, by contrast, had plenty of previous partners, had even been married once. It was never going to work out, she said. Too young, too crazy. I think we'll get a year and a half out of it. Of all places, a book launch was where they met. Gillian's old friend Wendy had written some short stories. The launch took place at a bar down near the docks, which had not yet succumbed to anyone's notion of a new Belfast. Wendy and her husband had filled said bar with vases of lilies, but still the smell of stew lingered. Gillian was at a table with a ragbag of people, some who worked with her friend, a few neighbours, a taxi driver Wendy regularly used. And although they'd all bought the book dutifully, they agreed that they didn't read short stories or even like them all that much. Then another person joined them. She said that when Wendy next came in for a blow dry, she would just get her to tell the stories and that would save the bother of reading them. Tracy was Wendy's hairdresser. There was dancing upstairs at the launch. Prancing about in a poky room above a pub was the last thing Gillian would enjoy, but that was where Tracy had been. The blonde hair framing her face was damp. She said she had to go because she was working early in the morning, and did anyone fancy sharing a taxi? No one did. Gillian said that she was leaving anyway, and that if she wanted, she could give Tracy a lift to wherever she needed to go. I'll leave that there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you, Iris, as well, for the great readings. So we're coming to the end of the event. I think we have a little bit of time for some questions. If you want to put them in the chat box, you can direct them to a particular writer if you like, or a general question. We have a comment from Claire M to Roisin. The distrust of tech is really noticeable. When I first joined Threema, a secure messaging app, the only people already there were my German friends. And then Sinead has a question directed to Elaine. Your novel is set in a hospital ward. Did this device limit the action at times? Did the use of the severely paralyzed male patient who observed everything and secretly managed to type, but seemed to play no role as he observed everything, come to you as an idea to give a different perspective as you wrote the novel, or did you have it in mind from the start?
Will I go first?
Yeah.
No, I didn't have it in mind from the start. I suppose that's like everybody here. It just evolved as the novel was being written. I definitely wanted to be a mixed gender ward, so that was important. But yeah, so there is a man that's paralyzed in the novel, and he was very important. Setting it on a hospital ward, I enjoyed the cave-like space of that. So for me, because it's an auditory chamber, so you hear all the stories. So it didn't really limit it, because also we have moments where Sinead goes back into the past and jumps forward as well. Thank you, Sinead, for your question.
Thank you. Do we have any more coming in from the audience? We have a lot of people appreciating the readings. Thank you so much for your very kind messages. So Elaine, there's another question from Claire. I love the poem. I felt like I was right beside you watching the sheep, and it felt brutal. Empathy is so powerful. How do you approach the creation of this in your poems?
Yeah, I did actually DM Claire, so we had a quick chat about it. I was hoping I was writing prose when I wrote the novel. I think I just read like a poet, maybe, because that's my background. But yeah, I think, yeah, just with a hospital novel, empathy was really important. And I grew up on a farm, so I just went back into that space of shearing sheep. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have a general question. So whoever wants to jump in on this one, considering it, I guess it's Brigid's Day and the sort of theme of the evening is female creativity. The question from Danny is, how do the writers, excuse me, feel about their novels being translated by a man? Does it matter at all?
I wouldn't mind it. Are they human? Are they human men? Yeah, I don't. I think it's an amazing thing to be translated. I actually got an email from my Chinese translator, and I actually don't know whether they're a man or a woman because their name doesn't mean anything to me. So I just call them they in my head. But we've been sending messages back and forth, and they've really come up with some great thoughts about the novel, and it's really it's just so mad that someone on the other side of the world can understand your story, and it's such a privilege. And yeah, like for me, like to be translated by anyone is absolutely incredible. So yeah, I definitely wouldn't have a preference. Yeah. Thank you so much for the question. Yeah.
Hilary. You're muted, Hilary.
Okay, can you hear me? I think the translations, gender is not important. I think that there's a kind of synchronicity that can happen between a writer and the person who's translating the work, and it's about far more than gender. And I'm currently working on an adaptation of a Gorky play, and I'm working with a Russian translator and from a Russian literal, and the connection like that you're describing, Louise, the connection that we're having, the work is the thing. You know what I mean? And it's a real privilege to hear your work in another language, and just, you know, I don't think gender matters, but it was so fantastic to hear the work in a language that I don't understand tonight. It just felt really dynamic and exciting. Bye.
Thanks, Hilary. Does anybody else want to contribute to that? No.
I just actually want to thank translators. I think the work they do is extraordinary. It's patient, it's painstaking, gender is irrelevant, it's passion for the work, and it's passion for writing, and I hugely appreciate it. So,
thank you. I'll also add to that it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Hans Christian Oeser, Anna-Nina Kroll, and Werner Löcher. So thank you all so much. I think you've just, you're incredible at what you do. So there's a question here, just a kind of like general administration question from Uta Maria Tema. Will there be a list of the works available? I will send out an email, a follow-up email to everybody who attended tonight, just to kind of like give a sort of overview of the writers again and the works. And we'll also have a raffle from everyone who registered to win the books. So that information will be sent to you after the event. So thank you for that question. I have a question from Jennifer for Olivia. Why was talking about difficult women so important to you?
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry, I want to apologize earlier. I wanted to thank Hans and Iris. My children were crawling along the floor and I kind of froze as they came in to listen to everybody in German. They were very excited. They thought it was my friend. It's them and me. I think for me, talking about difficult women, maybe it's because coming from the north for a long time, it felt like we almost couldn't say anything at all. And when I read people like Wendy and Jan and Louise Kennedy, I kind of, and also Deirdre Madden, people in the past, it gave me the courage maybe to look at the story that I wanted to tell. And I came to writing quite late on, and actually I'm in a writing group with Louise, and it's been really wonderful to have people encourage me to talk about things that I'm interested in. But I think in literature, it's nice to have flawed characters. We're all so messy, so complicated. It would be really boring if we were all really nice and lovely and everybody got on. So I'm drawn to the kind of darkness in the work and the complex nature of like women in general. I'm here for that. Thanks.
Thanks, Olivia. And yeah, we're getting a lot of love in the chat box. So thank you. We really appreciate that. A lot of love for all of the writers tonight. And I also just want to add to that, it's been such a pleasure to hear from you all and to hear the readings. Thank you, Kate and Iris. And again, thank you to the translators for such brilliant work. I said earlier before the event started that this is sort of like the Woodstock of online literary events, and I really stand by that. I think it's just been such an amazing lineup, such incredible talent, and we really hope that you'll make it over to Berlin or like elsewhere in Germany, and we can do another event together in real life. And go for some post talk, drinks afterwards, and yeah, that would be a real delight. So that we're going to wrap it up there, and we're actually like in decent time. So I'm just going to, well, I've already done thanks now. I hope I didn't miss anyone. While I did, I'd also like to give a big thank you to Literature Ireland, Sinead McKay, who's here, who's actually been contributing a lot to some very good conversation in the chat box. And Sinead helped enormously with the curation for tonight's event. I'd also like to extend my thanks to our colleagues in the Consulate General in Frankfurt, Niall Farrell especially, as well as colleagues here at the Embassy in Berlin for all their help with tonight's event. We did a lot of emailing out to publishers, to literary journalists, to programmers and festivals. So tonight's event, the idea was really for it to be a big launch pad for the amazingly talented writers to get their work out to a German audience, and we really hope that this is just the start of it. I especially want to thank Carla Sheva, who has been the host tonight, Botschaft von Irland. Thank you, Carla. And of course, I want to thank thank you as well for your attendance. So yeah, it's been an incredible event, and yeah, thank you for being a part of it. Please do follow the Embassy's social media channels and get in touch if you would like to join our mailing list for monthly news and events. And we hope that you'll join us again for future events. Vielen Dank und einen schönen Abend.